In October, as the leaves change and the air turns crisp, we find ourselves surrounded by the thoughts of Halloween, candy, and of course, the monsters that lurk in the shadows. This month, Behind the Headlines is doing a special series surrounding cases that took place in October, or that embody the spookiness of the season. In this first installment, we're covering a case that highlights the darkest side of humanity, where the perpetrator of a heinous crime exemplifies the very definition of a monster. This monster comes in the form of an evil stepmother named Tiffany Moss, who went above and beyond to make sure her stepdaughter Emani's life was nothing short of a living hell. Known as the Cinderella effect, this morbid psychological phenomenon describes the increased tendency for children to undergo physical abuse from step-parents. This seems to be true in this highly disturbing and upsetting case, but to uncover everything that happened to precious Emani, we need to go behind the headlines. Emani Gabrielle Moss was born on April 23, 2003 to parents Emani Moss and Danita Leaks in Lawrenceville, Georgia. Unfortunately for Emani, as soon as she entered the world, she was immediately thrust into a life of dysfunction and toxicity. Danita was known to struggle with substance abuse, and court records indicate that this caused problems in her and Eman's relationship. In 2004, Emani was charged with battery and second-degree child cruelty for allegedly assaulting Danita in front of Emani, who at the time was only 1 year old. There is never an excuse for domestic violence, but regardless of this incident, the courts decided that Emani was still a more suitable parent than Danita. He was granted full custody of Emani after they split up, and Danita ultimately signed over all of her parental rights. In fact, Danita had previously signed over her rights for 4 other children from previous relationships as well, and after that, she had very little, if any, involvement in Emani's life. After breaking away from Danita, Emani was left to raise Emani on his own, with the help of extended family members including his mother, Robin. He decided to start attending services at Freedom Christian Church, where they developed a lot of friendships and church community with other members. In 2007, Emani was introduced to a fellow member named Tiffany Brown, who at the time was in college studying early childhood education. Many Sundays after church, large groups of members would go out to lunch together, and Emani and Tiffany slowly started to develop a friendship. That gradually progressed to them seeing each other outside of church as well, and Emani was really impressed with how great Tiffany was with Emani and how much she seemed to love children. By 2008, Tiffany worked up the courage to tell Emani that she didn't want to be just friends anymore, and from there they officially started dating. In early 2008, the couple got engaged, and by July, they were married in a sweet summer ceremony. By the time they officially tied the knot, Tiffany had since graduated from college and was working as a preschool teacher. Emani had a steady job as well, and the three of them were living happily together as a family. In 2010, Emani and Tiffany found out they were expecting a child of their own and gave birth to a little boy named Tristan. Emani was around 7 years old and was thrilled to be a big sister. However, this is also when the dynamics of the family began to change. At school, Emani's teachers always said she was a joy to have in the classroom. She was said to be friendly, outgoing, and very intelligent. She even went out of her way to try to befriend students that would be considered the bullies of the class, and Emani was notably empathetic for her age.
She completed all her projects, and she was a wonderful friend to every student, even a bully that she tried so hard to be friends with on a daily basis. One time she wrote a letter to me and to the bully and said, "Let's just be friends, let's forget about what happened." And she said, "Miss Neal, I'm sorry for the meanness that this child and I had, and we'll be nice to one another." And she just was a precious girl, precious girl.
Even though Emani typically loved school, it was around the time her baby brother was born that she began struggling with her schoolwork. This isn't really abnormal because with a new baby comes a lot of changes, less sleep for everyone in the home, and parents can often become so focused on the infant that things like homework fall by the wayside. These changes were reflected on a particularly poor report card, and for some reason, Emani seemed terrified to take the report card home to show her parents. Her teacher ended up sending Emani to the school nurse, and she confided that she was afraid her parents would hurt her if they saw her grades.
She was precious. It was a blessing to have her in my classroom. The only issue we had was having her homework completed on a regular basis. She had difficulty completing her homework. The only outburst that I ever had was she cried because we had these behavior sheets that we had to write on just to keep a record, and I was going to write down that she didn't complete her homework, and she cried and cried, and
She also said that Tiffany had hit her with a belt, and the nurse saw that Emani had welts and bruises on her arms that looked far beyond a typical punishment spanking. Being mandated reporters, the school called DCFS, who came to investigate the allegations. They believed the marks more closely resembled the metal end of a belt rather than the leather strap, and from there, a full investigation ensued. Emani elaborated even more that she'd actually been hit with a curtain rod as well, and investigators discovered more wounds on her back, chest, legs, and shoulders. Emani received a call at work that he needed to come to the police station due to a family emergency. There he learned that Tiffany had already been arrested for abuse and cruelty to children. Instead of denying the allegations, Tiffany accepted a plea deal for 5 years of probation as part of Georgia's first offender program. However, there were other consequences as well, because child abuse charges meant that Tiffany could no longer work at the preschool and would likely never be able to work in any school setting taking care of children again. Emani said that after all of this took place, the vibe in the home became very contentious, and it was clear that Tiffany was feeling resentful toward Emani. Even though she was the one who caused the situation, the courts came out to check on the home and could see that it was no longer a healthy environment for Emani. She was subsequently removed and placed in temporary custody with Emani's mother, Robin. While Emani was out of their care, Tiffany was ordered to complete anger management and parenting classes with the hope of Emani being able to return once it was safe to do so. Emani was in Robin's custody for around 6 months, and during that time she was said to be thriving. She was doing much better in school, growing like a weed, and just seemed much happier with her grandma. But probably because she wasn't being beaten over grades at just 7 years old. Even after Tiffany completed all of the mandated classes, Robin practically begged Emani to allow Emani to stay with her. She was doing so well, but Robin could see that she was afraid to go back around Tiffany. However, Emani later said that his pride couldn't let someone else keep taking care of his daughter. He wanted to prove to his mom that he could raise Emani without her help.
Did your mom ever ask for Emani to come and live with her?
Yes, yeah.
And what did you say to that?
In my pride, I said I was trying to prove something to my mom that I can do it.
Shortly after Emani arrived home, Emani and Tiffany welcomed another child, this time a little girl named Emma. With Tiffany now out of a job, 2 babies, and Emani under one roof, money became very tight. The family had to move in with Tiffany's mother for a little while, but Emani took on a second job to make ends meet. His schedule was honestly pretty crazy, and for his first job, he'd get up at 5 a.m. to make it to work at 7. He'd work until around 4 p.m., come home, get ready for his second job at 6, and work until around 1:30 a.m. He did have the weekends off, but since Tiffany was at home with the children throughout the week, she would typically leave them with Emani and go hang out with her friends or see her family. Emani said he didn't mind this because during the week he barely got to see the kids at all, so he would use the weekends to spend time with them. After saving up enough money by 2012, Emani, Tiffany, and the kids were able to afford their own apartment once again. It kind of seems like things really couldn't go on behind closed doors when the family was living with Tiffany's mom. However, once they were in their own place and had privacy, her mistreatment toward Emani started back up again. So much so that she tried to run away. A worker at their apartment complex even contacted the authorities after finding Emani hiding in some bushes. She was brought into the complex office and said that she was afraid to go home after getting off the bus. When police arrived, Emani said that Tiffany would punish her by tying her to a chair and placing her in a freezing cold shower. However, the officers weren't able to find any visible bruises or injuries this time, and said they lacked sufficient evidence to take further action. After this, there were multiple other instances where the police were called due to Emani running away, failing to return home, and even opting to sleep by herself in the bushes of the apartment complex. But Tiffany consistently tried to portray her as just a rebellious child.
What do they find? They find Emani at almost 1 o'clock in the morning, asleep in the dark in the bushes of the front of the apartment complex. She was 9. That child was 9 years old and would rather be in the dark, alone, sleeping in the bushes than in the room next to her.
Basically, anytime Emani was at work, Tiffany would constantly text him about Emani acting up, and he later said he felt like he had no choice but to take Tiffany's word over everything that was going on.
In these messages for the entire month of October is about what a pain she was, about what she did wrong, about having to deal with certain things and how it was. She talks about those types of things. The Blu-ray is out, so Tristan, can you help me do this so Tristan can watch Netflix on the back TV? Maybe that seems insignificant in normal life, but it's not in this case. Because what she's doing is she's taking care of Tristan and she's taking care of Emma, but she's not taking care of Emani. She's not feeding Emani. She's not taking care of her when she's sick or when she's hurt. All she does is complain about that child. Because that child was ugly and that child was nothing to her.
During this time, Emani was also going through a growth spurt, and Eman noticed that on the weekends, she would eat constantly, but never seemed to gain any weight. He assumed that she just had a high metabolism which was causing the weight loss, and even took her to a doctor who said she was medically fine. However, one day after returning home from work, he noticed that Emani's long, beautiful hair had been cut almost entirely off. She always loved her hair and enjoyed styling it with bows and other accessories, which made this even stranger. Another family member asked about the haircut, and Tiffany claimed that she did it as a punishment for Emani's misbehavior, saying something like, "If you're going to act ugly, you're going to look ugly." As more time passed, Eman could see the decline in Emani's energy as well. She seemed withdrawn and no longer her happy, vibrant self. Neighbors would also say later that even though they frequently saw Emani's younger siblings playing outside, they only ever saw Emani once during their entire time living next door. After the haircut incident and the noticeable weight loss, Robin begged for Emani to come and live with her again, but unfortunately, Eman continued to say no. He placed his full trust in Tiffany to take care of the children while he was at work, and figured that Emani was just going through a phase. It also seemed like after the family members started questioning Tiffany on how Emani was doing, they almost completely stopped bringing her out of the house. A district attorney named Danny Porter later said that during this time, it was almost as if Emani just fell off the face of the earth. Now, I know you're probably wondering where was CPS during all of this? Why wasn't Tiffany's probation officer checking in on Emani and so on, which all are valid questions, and we will get to that in a moment. However, like in so many other cases with one or both parents trying to hide abuse from the system, Tiffany decided that this would be a great opportunity to pull Emani out of school and start homeschooling. Many people think this shouldn't be legal for someone convicted of child abuse, but it happened. And whether it was Tiffany's plan or not, it seems like that was the beginning of the downward spiral for Emani.
She had 2 small children at home, and Sharon Niece immediately said, red flags went up. This was a horrible idea. This was a very bad idea. Why would you homeschool her? Because what was homeschool? Homeschooling was code words for isolate and hide. We can isolate this children from everyone she knows. She will not see friends every day. She will not see her family. She will not have a teacher that can save her and protect her. She will be in this apartment, and the only 2 adults will be this defendant and a father who is gone 16 hours a day.
On October 24th, 2013, Eman was at work when he received a text from Tiffany saying that something was wrong with Emani and she wasn't doing well. After finishing his shift, he got home to find Emani in the bathtub, looking like she was having a seizure. Eman later recalled that she was trying to say something but couldn't get the words out, and her eyes were darting back and forth. Eman carried Emani back to her room and tried to feed her some infant milk formula with a spoon, but she wasn't able to eat. He also realized that she was so weak that she couldn't even get up to go to the bathroom and was wetting the bed. Eman later said that at that moment, he felt like Emani was beyond repair. He tried to tell Tiffany that they needed to get her to a doctor, but she reportedly panicked and said things like, "No, we can't call 911. I'm on probation. They'll think I did something to her." So instead of seeking medical attention for his daughter, Eman just tucked her into bed and went to his second job. Emani lay there in that same spot for 5 days, and on October 29th, 2013, Eman got another text from Tiffany letting him know that she had passed away.
She died on October 29th, alone in that bed, in her own filth and in her own waste, while her little brother ran around outside playing, her little sister in the pack and play. And when you match up the pictures from the phone, while this defendant sat watching TV and cooking lasagna. Emani died alone in a room while all that life was going on around her.
Once again, he casually finished his shift instead of rushing home to be by his daughter's side or to see if there was anything he could have done to save her life. When he did finally arrive home, he found Emani cold and lifeless in bed. Tiffany begged him not to call the police, saying that they would take their kids away and put both of them in jail. She suggested that they just tell people Emani had run away again, which would be believable given her history. Not knowing what else to do, Emani went along with Tiffany's plan and tried to figure out a way to hide Emani's body. He continued going back to work until they figured things out, and they wrapped Emani in the bedsheets and blankets and moved her to the computer room. They kept her there for a few more days until Emani was off for the weekend. That's when they'd be able to carry out the rest of their plan, which horrifically was a DIY cremation. Over the weekend, Emani was seen on store security cameras buying black trash bags, lighter fluid, charcoal, and a metal trash can. He and Tiffany wrapped her body in trash bags and attempted to fit her body into the can. However, due to rigor mortis, they had to bend and even break her limbs and use duct tape to keep her in place. They loaded the can into the back of Emani's truck along with their other 2 kids and drove around searching for a spot to burn the body. They finally found a secluded area and set the can on fire. Emani later said he watched it burn for about an hour, but it didn't seem to be making any changes. He didn't realize that it takes around 1400 to 1800 degrees for a proper cremation at a funeral home, and doing that outside in a trash can wouldn't get nearly hot enough. If you watched our recent video about Tara Grinstead, you may remember that when Bo and Ryan Dukes burned her body, it took several days and continuously adding more and more wood. So yeah, 1 hour and some barbecue bricks wasn't going to do much. After waiting for the trash can to cool down, they loaded it back into his truck and returned home, basically pretending like nothing ever happened. As the days went by, Emani started to feel guilty and overwhelmed, but not so bad that he couldn't make it to work, of course. He even continued driving to work with the can containing Emani's body in the back of his truck. After one of his shifts, he ended up breaking down and confided in a longtime friend about what happened, basically just spilling everything and asking what he should do. His friend urged him to call 911, and finally, it was like Emani snapped out of it and realized that's what he should have done all along. After finishing his next shift, Emani called Tiffany on his way home to let her know that he was about to call 911 to report everything that had happened. Tiffany panicked, loaded their 2 kids into the car, and sped off to her mother's house. When she arrived, she told her mom, "You have to take the kids, they're coming for me." She quickly changed her clothes and left the kids with her mom. Meanwhile, Emani called 911, and at first the dispatcher thought he was calling about a potential suicide. He was talking about not wanting to live anymore, and they weren't exactly sure what was going on. Before police got there, he placed the trash can in bags containing the bed sheets and her clothes and some grass. When the officers arrived, Emani was visibly shaken and struggling to explain what happened. When he was able to calm down, he eventually pointed to the trash can in the yard and said that Emani's body was inside. One of the officers went over to the can and lifted the lid and was absolutely horrified by what he saw. Emani, wrapped in bags, stuffed head first in the can with only her small, burned feet poking out. Emani was immediately arrested and taken to the station. At first, he tried to tell police that Emani had actually drank some chemicals and died, and then he panicked and put her body in the trash can to cremate her. However, it was clear he was lying due to obvious signs of starvation and abuse. Emani eventually confessed to everything that had happened, even though he knew he wouldn't be getting out of jail anytime soon. As the investigation continued, authorities began searching for Tiffany, and a few days later, she turned herself in. In 2015, Emani pled guilty to felony murder and concealing a death. As a result of his plea, he received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, which allowed him to avoid the death penalty. A condition of the plea agreement also required him to testify against Tiffany. Even though there was a mountain of evidence stacked against her, Tiffany decided not to take a plea, risking receiving the death penalty for malice murder, 2 counts of felony murder, 2 counts of first-degree cruelty to children, and concealing the death of another. The trial began on April 15, 2019. It was presided over by Judge George Hutchinson, and the jury consisted of 6 men and 6 women. In another unusual move, Tiffany chose to represent herself rather than accepting a public defender. She stated that she didn't need any help because God would help her through. However, during the trial, she did absolutely nothing to defend herself, and unfortunately, God wasn't able to cross-examine any witnesses or call anyone to speak on her behalf, or probably just chose not to. Tiffany literally just sat there while the prosecution presented its case, and in contrast, they had a lot to say. Tiffany didn't even take the time to give an opening or closing statement, which is crucial for the jury to see both sides of a case. When the judge asked if she needed help or had any questions, she would just respond by saying, "No thank you." As the judge reviewed the evidence, including photos of Emani's burned body, they became visibly upset, with some members even crying. The medical examiner said that during Emani's autopsy, it was revealed that she had no food in her stomach and weighed just 32 pounds. An average 10-year-old should weigh around 89 to 105 pounds, meaning Emani was around the weight of an average 3-year-old.
What was one of the things that obviously you noticed about the physical appearance of Emani Moss?
Well, she was extremely thin and emaciated. She had a starved look, and based on her weight and the loss of muscle mass and the fact that her organs were so small compared to the normal charts, I was able to conclude from that she had died from starvation.
The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours and ultimately found Tiffany guilty. They also agreed on the death penalty, making Tiffany Moss the only woman in Georgia currently on death row.
We, the jury, find beyond a reasonable doubt that the offense of murder as alleged in count 1 was outrageously or wantonly vile, horrible, or inhuman in that it involved depravity of mind of the defendant, signed and dated by the foreperson. Verdict as to penalty, count 1, murder. We, the jury, recommend and fix the penalty as death, signed and dated by the foreperson. Please give it to counsel for their review as to form, sir.
If she's executed, she'll be the third woman executed in Georgia history. Despite her conviction, Tiffany had since tried to appeal her sentence, claiming she was not competent to stand trial. Her appeal team argued that her behavior during the trial indicated a lack of sound mind because no one competent would just sit there and do nothing and not at least try to defend themselves. Her team has even suggested that Tiffany suffered a brain injury as a child, which they claim resulted in brain damage. However, it's important to note that she graduated from college and worked as a preschool teacher, which indicates she possessed the cognitive ability to understand right from wrong. Her insisting that Iman not call 911 because they would get in trouble also shows that she knew right from wrong and cause and effect of her actions. Her other children were also very well taken care of, loved, and properly fed, which shows that Tiffany's issues were only toward Emani. Regardless, due to these appeals, her execution date has been postponed multiple times.
Tiffany Moss is now the only woman on Georgia's death row. She'll be sent to Lee Arundel State Prison in Alto, where female death row inmates are held until execution. Moss will go through a 7 to 10 day intake process, which includes medical exams and interviews.
She'll be put into a one-person cell and maintained in that one-person cell until her sentence is carried out or her sentence is reversed.
There are 3,500 female prisoners in Georgia, but Moss on death row stands alone.
But the jurors saw the pictures, they heard the testimony of this young child being starved to death. That determines in large part whether an individual gets the death penalty.
In June of 2018, Gwinnett County attorneys filed a lawsuit against the Georgia Division of Family and Children's Services, as well as the State Department of Human Services, on behalf of Emani's grandmother, Robin Moss. The lawsuit stated, as a result of the negligence of DCFS and its agents, Emani suffered constant abuse and deprivation from 2008 until her untimely death. Robin Moss is seeking a jury trial to get reasonable compensatory damages from the state for the injuries her granddaughter received. As a direct and proximate result of the negligent conduct, plaintiff Robin Moss is entitled to recover for the wrongful death of Emani, including the full value of the economic and non-economic value of her life she had lived. The lawsuit also alleged that in 2008 and early 2009, there was a previous report to DFCS that Emani may have been sexually abused when she was 3 years old. The person who reported the possible abuse told the agency that they had noticed blood in Emani's underwear when they picked her up from daycare. Other previous reports from school were outlined as well, including an incident in which Emani claimed that she was hit on her back and head by Tiffany because she was eating breakfast too slowly, which would make her late for the bus. Emani saw the school nurse for her injuries and received an ice pack, and an investigation with DFCS was opened. Apparently during this investigation, the agent spoke to Emani and Tiffany, but wrote that no concerns were noted, and the case was closed. The suit claims that DFCS had multiple opportunities to investigate the Moss household and intervene on Emani's behalf. Even though Tiffany was arrested and given probation for the incident regarding the belt and curtain rod, Emani shouldn't have been returned to live with Tiffany unless there was serious monitoring going on to prevent further abuse. It was also stated that just months before Emani's death, DFCS received an anonymous call from a person who said Emani was being neglected and appeared to be thin, but the agency didn't conduct any follow-ups to the family home after getting the tip. At this point, it's not clear whether or not Robin won the lawsuit, but DCFS has said they've made some changes in the way they address reports of abuse.
If they would have did their job when she got beat the first time. That's sign number 1. Ran away, sign number 2. Ran away again, sign number 3. I mean, how many signs do you have to have?
In a statement, the then DFCS director Bobby Cagle said, agency workers are to no longer decide whether reports like the one involving Emani in 2012 warrant investigations based solely on information gathered over the telephone, and no case is to be assigned a less serious, lower priority status until a caseworker meets with a child who allegedly has been victimized. Many people have wondered what happened to Emani's siblings Tristan and Emma now that their parents are going to spend the rest of their lives behind bars. Both Iman's mother Robin and Tiffany's mother Pearlie Bashir each tried to gain custody of the children, but it was ultimately decided that neither grandmother would receive the children. The judge determined that Robin couldn't financially support the children, but had harsher words for Pearlie. He said, "It was unfathomable to the court that Ms. Bashir could not have known that Emani was being abused and mistreated at some point between 2010 and October 2013. At best, Ms. Bashir turned a blind eye to the suffering and ultimately to the death of a child who had been living in her home off and on. She cannot be depended upon to protect children living in her home." Tristan and Emma have since gone on to be adopted by their respective foster families. The case of Emani Moss differs from some other high-profile abuse cases where the children were isolated and able to fly under the radar of agencies like DCFS completely. Even though Tiffany did her best to hide the abuse by pulling Emani out of school, there were still family members and other people who made anonymous tips about her weight, hair, and other signs of mistreatment. 11 Alive ended up doing a special on Emani called Failed to Death, which I think perfectly describes the situation. She was failed by the systems put in place to protect children, but also failed by her biological mother, Tiffany, and her father. There are some people who point out that Iman was clearly manipulated by Tiffany and was working so hard to provide for his family that the signs of abuse went unnoticed. However, other people don't believe that her literally dying from being starved to death could have gone unnoticed, and it was his duty to get her medical attention, especially after she was having seizures. Regardless if his wife was on probation, his #1 priority should have been to keep his children safe, even if that meant keeping Emani away from his wife. There is more to being a father than just providing financially, and he was so wrapped up in being a good employee that he failed to be Emani's protector. Some say the fact that he had 2 children made things more complicated, but going so far as to burn your child's body in a trash can is beyond the realm of acceptable behavior, and there is just no excuse for his actions. It's clear his pride was more important than Emani's safety, because Robin desperately wanted to keep her. As for Tiffany, many people think that her choosing to represent herself just shows that she is a narcissist who thinks she knows better than everyone else. She made conscious decisions to beat Emani, lock her away in their apartment, keep her from family, cut off her hair, starve her to death, and then convince her husband to desecrate her body in the most disrespectful way possible. That just shows the level of hatred she had towards this extra child who wasn't biologically hers. There are so many loving and caring step-parents who take on their bonus kids and treat them as their own, and I can't imagine how confusing it must have been for a little girl to be hated by a grown woman when she didn't do anything wrong. There's even been some people who point out Tiffany's blank stare during the trial and general lack of emotion, causing some to think she's just a completely soulless monster. Emani Moss's story is yet another case that highlights the shortcomings of agencies like DCFS. However, no more children should have to die in order for changes to be made and reports to be taken seriously. If someone can bring themselves to beat a child with the metal part of a belt and a curtain rod over homework and eating too slowly, that right there should be a one and done situation. Tiffany Moss should have never been given the opportunity to hurt another child, and Emani's family believes that by receiving the death penalty, justice has been served. Whether or not that penalty will be carried out remains to be seen, but you'll have to let me know what you think about this in the comments down below. I know stories like this are horrible to listen to, but if children like Emani have to suffer at the hands of a monster like Tiffany Moss, the least we can do is share her story and remember her for the beautiful child she was.
She was a pain. She was disposable. She was trash. She was trash. But she wasn't. She wasn't. She was a child. And she was a granddaughter. And she was a niece. And she was a friend to kids who needed one. And she was a student who brought joy to a teacher. She was a daughter. She was Emani. She was Emani. And she mattered. She mattered.
This has been Joshua John with Behind the Headlines, and until next time, stay safe.